Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
What's the weirdest thing a patient said to you? I had a dementia patient say to me sweetly, "Oh honey, you're so pretty." And then she got this weird look on her face, kind of sad and scared at the same time. But someone's going to snatch you up. I don't know who, something wild. Girl, what? Something? And then my shift ended like 10 minutes later and I had to walk to my car alone through a dark parking lot. Really creepy. Resident nurse, ICU. Frequent flyer alcohol withdrawal patient, 6th admission in 1 year. Had been well behaved for the previous 2 shifts with me, so restraints off. Patient doing well for 4 hours. Walk in for 4:8 as a code is called down the hall. Patient has the look of a cornered raccoon holding a shiny. Don't you come near me with your death juice. Me, are you kidding me? I approach the bed slowly, and as the patient swings at me I grab his slow punch and casually start attempting to reapply the wrist restraint. We go into a full-on slow-motion wrestling match. I am a little weirded out, because the patient is honest to God moving at half speed here. At one point as I was tying down the first restraint I noticed the patient reaching with his other hand for my hemostats that I had clipped to my shoulder. With his hand moving at a glacial pace through the air toward my hemostats, "I'm going to stab you in the jugular with your own scissors." I reach up, unhook them, and drop them to the floor. "No, you are not, but, thanks for the warning." Resident nurse, ICU. A 98-year-old retired surgeon told me he was going to cut my heart out and eat it. I was glad he didn't have any weapons. He said it in such a menacing way, staring right at me. Scared the hell out of me. RN, retired. My mother passed away when I was 5 years old. I don't share this information with patients or anyone in general. This happened when I was working temp/PR in 3 states away from home. Was trying out the area after a breakup. So, when an 85 years old hospice patient had a lucid moment and said my mom's first and middle names looking right at me, and then she didn't want to leave so early. I still get chills. Smiled and said thank you. Did not move there. Moments like these are why I don't watch horror movies. SRSLY no thanks, get enough at work. RN, ICU. I extubated a transient man who was found down in a fountain, and as I was going to take the restraints off since the tube was out he looked me straight in the eye and calmly said, "When I get out of here, I'm coming to find you and I'm going to cut your eyes out." Restraints reapplied, proceed ordered. Yikes, man. BSN, RN. When I was in nursing school I had a 93-year-old lady that I had for a few days that I was feeding one day. She turned to me and said, "You're helping me," and I said, "Of course, that's what I do," and she said, "One day I'll help you. But you might not be able to see me. But I'll be there helping." Kind of ominous, but I like to believe she decided to be a part-time guardian angel for me. RN, ER. Had a psychotic patient in the ED seclusion area awaiting commitment. The patient was psychotic, hallucinating, and aggressive. On this particular day he ended up in 4-point leather restraints. I was standing between the door and the patient, restrained in bed. He turned his head, looked at me with a look of desperation and horror on his face, and whispered, "Hurry, you have 10 seconds. Then his gaze moved to the open door behind me. I turned to look at what he was looking at, saw nothing, then looked back at the patient. We made eye contact and he loudly whispered to me, his eyes the size of saucers, "Careful. She's right behind you." I turned around, nothing. Looking back at him and he was staring over my shoulder, very intensely, at one particular spot. I had chills and my hair was standing on end. I was more than a little creeped out. Usually, I don't think twice about this stuff and just ignore it, but the feeling I had that day was unsettling. RNER. I most definitely was. I am used to patients responding to internal stimuli or interacting with people that aren't actually there. This was different though. He also only slept like 15 hours during his entire stay in the ED, 40 plus days. I have never encountered a human being that was not affected by any psych meds. He would rest for maybe 10 minutes tops after getting B52 ed. He physically assaulted multiple staff members, so I will take my unsettling encounter as a win. RNER. Wiping an old woman's butt, and she turns her head and looks over her shoulder at me. You're going to go to hell for this. Very matter of fact. Also, back when I was a tech I brought a patient who could typically feed herself her breakfast. She just stared at it. I asked her if she wanted help opening things up and she slowly looked up and pointed to a spot right behind me. No, he'll help me. There was no one there. She coded like an hour later. Stop touching my damn leg. Linda, I'm not touching you, I'm up here by your head. I've just come to check you're okay, not you, you dizzy cow. That man. He followed me back after I went to town shopping. It was 3 a.m. It was just me in her room. Explained the time, there was nobody else there and she must have dreamt she had been shopping in her dreams. No, you silly bitch, look down there. Look at all my shopping bags. That pink one is for you, don't tell my daughters, didn't get those miserable buggers anything. Linda passed recently, I'm heartbroken as she was one of the best, dry humor, friendly and a look that said don't test me. MSN, APRN. Not anything that he said, but he wanted to show me his dog and turned his phone so I could see the picture. Then he keeps swiping through the pics of his dog. About every fifth pic was him in the nude and in strange positions like sitting spread eagle in the hood of a car. He just kept swiping. Oh, not that one, the next one is my pup. LPN. The banana is to banana today and promptly burst into tears until the offending fruit was removed from her tray. I need the blood of Jesus. Sung in an old lady voice. Don't look at me like I'm a whore. Ma'am, I wasn't even facing your direction, also, you're well over 90 years old. You must weigh 900 pounds. Speaking to my coworker and I by a rather confused gentleman, we could never figure out who he was talking to, so we decided we both weighed 450 pounds each. As a coworker and I were undressing a man, he snarked, "Do you even know what you are doing? I bet you don't have a degree." So, I made my coworker and I 2 certificates that stated we graduated summa cum laude with degrees in the practical application and removal of upper and lower body garments. RN, Oncology. 70-something female patient poked her head out of her room and beckoned to me from down the hall. I approached her and she asked, "Would you like to meet Satan?" She was watching the TV show Lucifer and thought the main character was too handsome not to share. RN OBGYN. I was doing fundal checks on a recovering postpartum patient and explaining to her about acceptable blood loss after deliveries and when I'd want her to tell me about heavier bleeding. Her husband was across the bed, losing color with every word I spoke. Finally, he interrupted me and said, "Your job is literally a nightmare, and I don't know how you do it, but thank you so much for signing up for this, no problem buds." I'm not a nurse, but I woke up from anesthesia post-surgery as the nurse was wheeling my bed to the recovery room. I came to in the middle of absolutely insisting that the nurse go bowling with me. I mean it, I was saying, we have got to go bowling. I know this great place, and you and I need to go bowling together tonight, just as soon as I get out of here. The nurse was saying, okay, sounds great, we sure will, and nodding her head. I don't bowl and have no interest in bowling. I have no clue why I was demanding this poor person accompany me there ASAP. She was a genuinely nice, very patient nurse. When I was an LPN, I worked in the nursing home, and I had a little old lady with a UTI. She was insane. She kept hiding her tab alarm in her brief. So, I was getting her ready for bed. She told me, "I'm going to eat you." And then points at her roommate and says, "And her too." I finally get her laid back in bed and she says, "I'm going to get you. I can't walk, but I can crawl." I was like, alright, no. Her poor roommate was a younger woman with cognitive delays, and she was terrified. They kept telling me at the nurse's station that I was going to be walking down the dark hallway to do my rounds and find her crawling for me down the hallway. I do hemodialysis in the acute setting. Older man admitted to the ICU and thought he was going to die that night and asked for a chaplain. A chaplain couldn't come in until the morning. Mind you, I am in with the patient about 6 hours. He told me how an older man in the neighborhood he grew up had stolen his innocence when he was a young boy. Then proceeded to tell how 3 boys in the neighborhood had beat the man to death in his shed using garden tools and that his brain was leaking out of his broken skull. The way he described it was like he was involved in a murder. Totally creeped me out. The man died in the early morning hours. I guess he had to tell somebody, and since the chaplain couldn't be there, he confided in me. I asked what happened to all the boys involved and he told me that shortly after the incident they all moved away, but that he still would see them on occasion. The patient's boyfriend tells me how he became HIV positive. Told me he was in prison for robbery and was given HIV by another inmate who knew he was positive. Boyfriend told me he stabbed the inmate to death and that's why he did 15 years. I told him that sounded reasonable to me and gave him an extra tray from the cart. Though it is best that we remain friends. My very first nursing clinical, I walked into my patient's room. I asked him how he slept. He threw his full urinal on me and said he didn't sleep at all because Alice Cooper had a concert on the roof and the Go Girls kept him up. Then, he jumps out of bed, onto the floor and, on all 4, scrambles to the bathroom like a spider monkey. So much, so fast. Got to change into hospital scrubs and grippy socks and continue my day. BSN, RN. I had a guy in DT so bad he thought I was a woman. He started bragging about his cars and asked me to get in bed with him. I'm 6 feet 2 inches with a mustache and beard, Just the other day I had a trach patient on the vent make the BJ motion with her tongue in her cheek and write on a piece of paper, "You're mine." One of my all-time favorites was when we had an auto versus peds in a room calling 911 because he was there against his will. There's a random man with a trach walking around the unit in a full Detroit Pistons getup with matching shoes eating hot Cheetos. He hears the guy calling 911 and puts his finger over his trach and says, "MF, you at 911. I literally died. Another one of my favorites is this guy in DT's asking me for a cigarette. I proceed to grab a straw, cut it, and put tape on the end to make it have the resistance of a cigarette. He's using his pulse ox to light it and says, "Pass me that ashtray over there." I gave him a small oral basin and he was quiet the rest of the night until he had to catch his flight the next morning. Had an extremely sick guy who had a horrible lower GI bleed. I was pretty much 1:1 with him while we waited for him to go up to the ICU. He told me that he had purposely run his wife over but made it look like an accident. Wife is okay now. I guess she was pretty severely injured at the time. He said it was his biggest regret in life and that he didn't want to die before telling someone and had to get it off his chest. Nursing student. Not a nurse, yet, but I was in the ED with my brother who was schizophrenic, trying to get him admitted for a brief time and back on his meds regularly. It was a long wait with a full room. he leans into me and says loudly, "Did you know I killed a guy one time? I'm a murderer." I made a loud sigh and said, "You know very well that isn't true." To which he thankfully responded with, "Oh no? I didn't? Thanks for picking that time to string a sentence together." He was very deep into hallucination territory and kept asking me if things he was seeing were real or not. RNER. A patient of mine was actively dying, and needed a specialized procedure that the wife didn't want to put him through. We were looking at reintubating for high CO2 or making him comfort measures. The wife couldn't decide. He was confused and violent, trying to hit me, and told me, "You know, this is all just a scam." The next night I had him again. She had ultimately decided on comfort measures, but wanted to wait for me to come back to work to implement them. We transitioned him off of high flow and had initiated a fentanyl drip for air hunger and comfort. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You know, this was all just a scam." And died. All I could say was, "Yes, sir." I didn't have it in me to argue with a dying man. RN. Installed and tested an ICD. When the patient came back from their visit to the great beyond, they were talking, which in and of itself is unusual. But all they kept saying was, "Oh, don't make me come back, it's so beautiful over there." The doctor, who'd been at this at least 25 years, noted out of the room so fast it wasn't even funny. Had a pleasantly confused lady in her 20s I took care of for weeks who thought our locked rehab unit was a cruise ship. Her delusion persisted over several weeks, and I kept having to remind her there was no smoking on the cruise ship. Attempting to reorient her made her upset, so we went along with it. RNER. Back in my med/surg days, was admitting a gentleman in his 30s. Was not the brightest crayon, but was pleasant. This was during his H&P questionnaire. Me, any history of back problems or back surgeries? Point, I was discharged from the army for spina bifida. Me, I'm sorry, what? Point, well, that's what they told me. Russian patient, Russians have lots of babies while Americans only have their kitty cats and puppy dogs, and that is why Russia will defeat America. This was before even COVID and has nothing to do with the current situation with Ukraine and Russia. I am fairly sure that makes it even weirder. BSN, RN. We had a 93-year-old female patient who was lonely and an alcoholic because she was 93 and did not care what happens from here on out. She's lived a good life. She begged for a pap smear, so the doctor I worked for finally agreed. She asked every appointment for months. We get her set up and go to start the pap. Doctor applies the KY and inserts how 2 fingers while explaining what he is doing the entire time. She lifts her head up and shouts, "This is the best I've felt in years, doc. Let's just hope I am not happy while you're in there. It will be a bond you won't forget." I was wearing a mask, laughing silently to myself, and the poor doctor, who was 48 years old, was crying slowly inside. He said, "Okay, all good." She says, "Can we do this every week?" MSN, RN. When I was in nursing school and working at a nursing home, a patient told me, "You aren't going to screw around with my husband anymore, you hussy." Then she threw her tray at me. I was 19. Her husband was another patient with Parkinson's and a BK amputation. They weren't married, and he hated her. I had a WW2 vet for a patient. I asked him how he made it through WW2. He kept mentioning how cold it was and how his friends suffered, how he lost people and how awful the conditions were. I asked him, "How did you get through all that?" I did not get the prophetic answer I was looking for. He said, "Hell, I wore the socks my mom sent me and the coat she sent under my official coat, but those socks kept me feet in perfect shape. That's how I got through those battles." A patient I had was a retired teacher, and I remembered her. I came on shift and went to introduce myself. She looked at me, then lunged towards me, baring and snapping her teeth and growling like a dog. I jumped back and stared at her while she growled at me. She was difficult to take care of because of all the snapping and carrying on. She had end-stage dementia. Hemispherectomy patient comes in postictal. He's a frequent flyer. Every time he came in he would yell at me at the top of his lungs, "You look just like Cindy Crawford, I love you." So loudly that you could hear him almost everywhere in the ear. This scenario played out every week for about 2 years. I do not look like Cindy Crawford, I'm no torrid beauty, he was quite obviously altered. I'm sure you can imagine all the fun and games the ED staff and EMS had with that one. RN, PsyQ, PVP, PV, RP, MMRPG. As helping a coworker get her patient cleaned up, for early discharge the next morning. Wanted to look good when he got his papers. He looks at it, says thank you. I'm going home tonight. We both laughed and I said eager, huh? Not tonight, friend, in the morning. He just smiled and patted my hand and said no girls. I'm going home tonight. She looked at me, I looked at her, we looked at him, he just smiled and said thank you. 3 hours later he went into SVT and then into VTACH and died. He went home after all. RN, telemetry. Perfectly mobile patient, male in his 50s who had surgery a couple of days ago, finally has his first post-op bowel movement, but it's right into his brief. After informing me of the cleanup on aisle feces, he then tacks this on at the end, "I'll need some help getting changed." But you know what? Don't rush. It actually feels kind of good. Like I'm a baby again. I stopped literally everything and made him get changed that instant. LPN/student RN. Many years ago, when I was quite young, I had a home health patient keep telling me feel free to read any magazines we have. Every magazine they had was porn. Hustler. Playboy. Names I had never heard of. I counted 26 magazines laying around in plain sight. Put some gloves on, put them in a pile so I wouldn't have to see them. To this day I will never forget that case. DNP, ARNP. Men pay extra for the weird holes, a woman told me as I was prepping her to have her colostomy repaired/revised. She was a worker, and I can only suspect what happened. Had a confused inpatient hospice patient asked me if her family was coming, I reassured her that her daughter had just gone home to shower and let out the dog. She then asked about if her son was really going to be here from Georgia. Her daughter had said he would be in late that night, so I let her know, as a form of reassurance. She looks at me and says, "Could you kill me before he gets here?" Oh God, there are so many. RN. Patient freaking out and worried there were sharks in the river and were going to get us. The local river flows into a larger river about 20 miles away and that is 101 miles from the ocean. Plus, sharks aren't known for walking on land. I could not convince her she was safe, but assured her I would do everything in my power to protect her if she put her call light on when the sharks arrived. God, I loved her. Point in air for severe diarrhea. Stool sample obtained, positive for roundworms. Tox screen run due to inconsistencies in behavior, came back positive for amphetamines. We will go in with the doctor to explain the results. Point, unfazed, declares everyone has worms where I'm from. And proceeded to pack their things and leave the AMA because this wasn't the answer they were looking for or something. Didn't want treatment of any sort. I had a 40-something newly diagnosed terminal cancer in the ICU. He was so annoying all night. I worked days and happened to pick up one night for bonus. The day nurse talked about how easy he was. Well, as the night went he got so needy. Suddenly around 1 to 2 a.m. his presser requirements shot through the roof. Around 6 a.m. he grabbed me, stared me dead in the eyes and said, "Call my mom." You best believe I did. He was dead before 8 a.m., mom and fiancé at bedside. LPN. More in the realm of inappropriate and rude than the genuinely strange, but here's mine. 60-something Y/O man on my med-surg/oncology floor for a massive hydrocele in his scrotum, and exceedingly initial stages of dementia. Consistently very rude to any and all staff. Man needed a shower badly but was refusing anything but bed baths despite being ambulatory. The room was smelly, he was smellier. Took lots of cajoling and whipping out the take no shit attitude, but eventually got him into the shower and on the bench with the help of another nurse. Helping him wash his back and get his hair dead angled, long hair in a braid, and this man yells "Scrub my sack," at max volume. Looked at my other nurse, she's giving me the same "oh hell no" look I'm giving her. It was my snapping point with this guy. I think I said something like, "You are a grown man, and you have full capability to reach where you need to clean. Here's a cloth." I had to get out of the room for a few seconds after that, so I didn't say something I'd regret. RN, or. So, not a patient, but I'm sitting in a bar, talking about my upcoming job interview, with a friend, and the lady next to me, stranger, says, "When you meet Dr. X, look at his hands. He has beautiful hands. He gave my brother a new bladder." I'm like, haven't even got the job, and stop touching my hand. Bonus, I met Dr. X one day, a funny guy, and told him about this instance. He said he was happy people were talking about him in random bars. BSN, RN. Taking care of a man in his 80s that was slightly confused. He was an amputee as well. I got him to the bathroom with assistance and not his leg. Went back to make his bed and suddenly he started screaming "Patrick's drowning" over and over. I rushed in to find the toilet overflowing and him being unable to remove himself from the water rushing over the rim. He didn't flush the toilet and his name wasn't Patrick. I laughed so hard and cried trying to figure out how to get him and Patrick out of there. Mental health worker. I think he's always with me now, from a client that had some really weird thing going on in her house. Over 25 years in outpatient mental health, people have said some interesting things. Things like this are usually psychotic, but I think it's possible 3 of them were telling the truth. The client I mentioned above was the only one that genuinely scared me. One girl woke up after overdosing and was delirious still. She had a sitter, but needed restraints because she was going crazy and kept trying to get up, and nearly fell. She looked at the restraint and asked, "Is this a scene? Can we skip to the next chapter?" And then indignantly looks at me and says, "And you're a woman." OMG, so one of my PTs complimented me on how cute my sons were. I have no children. And then when I asked her what they looked like, she said, "The one without the eyes, they're both smiling at you," and then proceeded to describe the other kid who had the same eye and hair color as my boyfriend. Apparently other employees have had weird things happen in that room to them too. BSN, RN. I walked into a room with a COVID patient during the peak of the Delta wave, and without me saying a single word the guy loudly shouted, "Just so you know, I am 100% a Trumpster. And I am happy I didn't get vaccinated." Was genuinely a decent enough patient, obnoxious, but not in a problematic way. I tend to be a bit more vocal about this sort of stuff with COVID than the average nurse, so we had some nice back and forth. I asked him why he didn't trust Trump's vaccine, but he said Fauci changed it. We talked about his military service and how many vaccines he took then. He said this is different. He said he had 5 members of his family die from the vaccine. I flatly said that wasn't true and he chuckled and admitted I was right. He was the type of weird guy with opinions you'd meet at a diner or dive bar that was loudmouth but weirdly endearing because they ultimately just wanted people to give them a tough time too. And to his credit, he was always taking part in self-care, didn't call unless he needed help, and was motivated as hell to be discharged. In many ways a great patient. Ultimately he was discharged, after something like 50 days on our unit. Unfortunately, like most patients I've seen like him, he was readmitted and died a few months later after he failed rehab. But I will never forget how that crusty 60-year-old ex-Marine who between doing arm raise exercise in bed at dawn greeted me with the sentence, "Just so you know I am 100% a Trumpster." CNA, nursing student. Oh, just last night I had a guy with a history of grandiose self-delusions as well as a newer TBI. He told me that he was the older brother of Jesus, who he lovingly calls Lil J, and he's going slay his mother Satan this Valentine's Day. He also told me about how natural selection favors me as a male working in a female-dominated industry. He said some weird things and gave me some creepy uncle vibes, but otherwise he honestly seemed like a pretty intelligent and empathetic man. I also had a guy admit to me that he shot someone in an airport bathroom. BSN, RN. An elderly female resident of mine when I was a CNA was experiencing hallucinations and quite confused shortly before she passed. As I was getting her ready for bed one night, she told me we can be friends. After further discussion we realized that she thought I was a young version of her late husband, but we all got a pretty big kick out of it. Called a patient regarding their upcoming appointment. I worked for an eye surgeon, and they said, in a jolly manner, "Oh yes, I'm coming in to get my eyeballs removed." Thinking they were psych patients, I just played along, then left a note for the surgeon. He laughed when he saw the name and note, then explained they were technically right, the patient was having both eyes enucleated. Another fun one was when a patient called to ask when they were scheduled to come in to get their eyeball washed. Me, what? They clarified they had a glass eye and came every year to get it looked at and occasionally touched up. BSN, RN. Pleasantly confused octogenarian with dementia. I was there to be his 1:1. He thought I was a lady of the night. He asked me to please not tell his wife, and that he's never done this before. And how nice the room was. And repeatedly asked if I had any trouble finding the place. Needless to say, that was the last time I wore lipstick to work. HCW, lab worked in a nursing home and had a new admit who was dry heaving extremely loudly but had nothing ordered for the poor guy, so this went on for a while. Lady W, dementia 2 rooms down, put on her call light for her brief to be changed. I come in and chat W her as I get ready to change her. As I'm doing this, I can hear the other residents still gagging loudly. Suddenly my lady said, "Honey, now, I know this sounds crazy, but I really think there's an animal being killed outside right now. It sounds like when the coyotes used to get inside the fence." I was creeping into my dementia patient's room to get 0200 vitals and was trying really hard not to disturb him. When I got to the monitor to turn on the BP cuff, I saw him staring straight at me with the blanket covering his face except his eyes. Then my patient said, "I was trying really hard to keep you safe, but he's been watching you all night through these windows. He'll be waiting for you when you leave this place." LPN. I was doing in-home wound care, mostly wound vacs, and I'd been treating this elderly lady for a few weeks when I got a new tattoo of a Buddhist Dharma wheel on my inner arm. She saw it, said it was very pretty, and she loved the colors, and asked what it was, so I told her. She gasped and said, "Oh no. You're such a nice person, it's such a shame that you're going to hell." I busted out laughing. I don't know what I expected her to say, but it sure wasn't that. I slapped my hand over my mouth right away and told her I didn't mean to laugh like that. She just caught me completely off guard, and after a moment she started laughing too. Honestly, it's one of my favorite moments from 20 plus years of nursing. She was actually great and didn't get offended that I had basically laughed in her face. I swear it wasn't on purpose, but that was funny. And we continued to have a great working rapport afterwards. But you got to love being a Buddhist living in the Bible Belt. The ER had a guy come in doped up on GHB. The doc taking care of him was a young white guy. Guy was in leather, strapped to the bed. He had kicked and bit and insulted every one of us. Shift change came and the doc's replacement was an ultra-cool AER doc from the islands. I was in Florida, who drove a Lambo, slept with nurses and was hilarious. They're leaning over the patient's gurney, facing each other, discussing him with him there. The patient looks at the white doc and says, $F$ and asterisk you N-word. It was quiet. Then the other doc taps him on the shoulder and says, excuse me, I'm the N-word. I'm the head onward here. Of course, the trauma room we were all in exploded with laughter. 25 years ago, but I remember it like yesterday. RN med/SURG. One of my ANOX4 patients had diarrhea and a rectal tube. He ended up removing 10 of them on his own, W/balloon inflated, before we stopped placing them. He just kept saying he had an itch and it fell out. Meanwhile, with no rectal tube and no tone in his muscles, he was leaking liquid poo constantly. This man called my phone 15 minutes before the end of my shift, after cleaning him up easily 20 times. Hi, could you get my nurse to bring one of those clean-out douches for my butthole? The sass I gave him about why he thought I would give him an enema when he hadn't had a non-liquid in over 2 weeks was unreal. RN, ICU. Obese patient, extended hospital stays with 2 PA arrests, 2 amputations, new dialysis dependence/ESRD, severe encephalopathy, all in someone who had once lived life fit and muscular with a cerebral job. Now with several weeks of chronic diarrhea, lakes of it, a leaky rectal tube, and skin breakdown. Lots of wound care and hygiene care with this person fighting it all the best they could. They had not spoken in more than 3 weeks. I, along with 3 other people, am holding this person on their side and doing wound care. They start reaching out with one hand with purpose, something they haven't done in a while. I can tell they are looking for something, so I say, hey, what are you reaching for? What are you looking for? They then say, mumbling, some words. The CNA near their head giggles. I don't hear well with background noise, and the wound vac alarm was going off, so I said, as the patient's arm continued to wave around, I'm sorry What did you say? What are you reaching for? They then say, loudly and with unexpected clarity, dat fat ass, and proceed to grab my buns. I am stuck, holding this person on their side, wound vac dressing almost back in place, my coworkers dying of laughter. It may have been the person's last words. BSN, RN. I had a nonverbal patient in a locked unit once. Worked with her for months and never heard her say anything coherent. I was spooning her meds, and she grabbed my wrist and said as discreetly as she could, I'll give you $1,000 to get me out of here. A bit shook, all I could think to say was, that doesn't even cover my rent. She didn't talk to me anymore after that. Valium time. In an elder care facility. Old woman with dementia who walked up and down the halls all day, mumbling incoherent words to herself. I'd worked there 6 months, and every day or night shift it would be the same. She would eventually allow us to put her in bed about midnight and she would sleep for 5 hours or so, or simply lie there mumbling. Anyhow, it's 11 p.m. and I'm walking alongside her trying to get her to take her meds. I've just a wee scoosh of liquid here, I said, as she continued her low melodic mumbling and walking down the hall. Hi, can I just? She stopped dead, turned, and looked at me, straight in the eyes, and spoke. They're all dead. And then she turned heel and continued down the hallway mumbling again as she was before. Serious WTF moment. Had a patient, mid-50s with a groin abscess. It wasn't open, but at some point it opened up and he was covered in pus and blood. CNA came by and saw and said, "Let me get you cleaned up." Patient responded, "No thanks, my nurse will be here soon. I want him to clean it up." I was down the hall dealing with various issues and it took some time to get to him and he was still sitting in it. He also had me take a picture of the wound. I thought it was odd, but whatever. Turns out he sent it to his daughter who was a neurologist to see what she thought of it. There was a full shaft in the picture. Had I known he was going to his daughter, I wouldn't have taken a picture of it for him. Man was a roller coaster. Working neuroscience unit and had to call de-escalation on a lady in her 70s with new onset of confusion in the middle of the night. Security, myself, my charge nurse, and another nurse were trying to get her down to a stat head CT. She looked straight at the security officer and said, "I know what you want to do, but I'm not taking my panties off. You have 2 hookers right there that will make porn for you. I'm not doing it," as she pointed to the charge nurse and me. I had to leave the room because I couldn't hold it together and the security officer was thoroughly confused as to why she thought we were trying to make a porno with her. He didn't realize before he got there one of the nurses was trying to explain we had to go take pictures of her head. I assume she twisted that into trying to take porn-type pics. Later when trying to give her pills before shift change it took 2 of us to convince her and she looked my colleague dead in the eye. "I hope this is poison," and downed the 2 pills, thyroxine, with no water and never breaking eye contact. She was pure chaos. Drug and alcohol patient, "I am going to kill you. And by you I mean you." He thought I was poisoning him. He was reported and ended up in a mental health facility where he was treated for his mental health issues. He was incredibly apologetic after he was on the correct medications. Until he stopped taking his meds. The next time I was alone in a room with him, he made it clear he only apologized because that's what was expected of him, and he was still planning to murder me. I have no idea where he is now. I hope he's okay and far away. I have a patient dying of CHF, very obese, sick, experiencing flash pulmonary edema. We called the rapid response team, and everyone was around here. I was just a tech at the time holding her hand. She has the mask on while we're waiting for respiratory and she's tapping my arm trying to say something. I assist her in pulling the mask away from her face for a second so she can talk. Between gasping breaths, she says to me, "I'm hungry." Literally died 10 minutes later. She used her last breaths to tell me she was hungry. Had a patient last Friday tell me that Virgin Mary isn't virgin because she was with Joseph, Judas, John, etc. She also said all Catholics are going to hell and that the Pope is satanic. Another patient asked me if I knew what his TSH levels were in 1992. I wasn't even born by then. BSN, RN. Dementia patient coming out of surgery at PACU. Post-anesthesia delirium. Asking for his cat. We tell him you are at the Veteran Affairs Hospital. You just had surgery. He goes, "What? The veterinarian hospital? You aren't even fit to have surgery on my cat. Where is my cat?" He stares at me, the nurse of Asian descent, then looks at the doctor of Latino descent. Then goes, "You have chinks and beaners running this place. I wouldn't even let you do surgery to my cat, much less me." He then proceeds to try to get up and pull out his 4. Doc and I walk away hiding our laugh while the Caucasian staff tend to him and stick an Ativan suppository to calm him down. We did good to keep a straight face. BSN, RN. My confused older lady had a bouquet of flowers sent to her by her son. The tech and I were in there cleaning her up and turning her. Patient, "Aren't my flowers beautiful?" Me, "Yes, they're incredibly beautiful." Patient, "Yes. They won't let me eat them though." Me, "Why not?" Patient, "Sigh, I have diabetes." We got a good laugh. Poor lady had been NPO all day and was starving. Maybe not the weirdest, but definitely funny. HCW, BSRT, R, CT, MR in progress. I was getting a patient from the ER once and they were holding their hands out like they wanted me to take what was in it. I was like, what is it? Because I know better. It was teeth they just pulled out. Reached up with the other hand, pulled out another, and put it in the hand with the rest. The patient wasn't there for an injury. It was like Charlie in that episode of It's Always Sunny. RN, ICU. Just yesterday had very confused and agitated alcohol withdrawal patient. Trying to distract and calm him with music. Radio started playing What's Love Got to Do With It, and I said, what does love got to do with it? He says everything. She broke my heart. I got a DUI, and it's been downhill from there. HCW, radiology. I haven't even wrought long, so the weirdest thing I can think of is the woman who was hallucinating a leaking fish tank in the corner of the room. Is anyone going to fix that? Oh my. Oh my. The water is getting everywhere. What a mess. Someone should fix that before all the water leaks out. BSN, RN. Back of an ambulance on a Wild West type stretch of an interstate. Patient just slammed into the back of a semi at 140 miles per hour in his Denali SUV. This man should not be living. The world's going to end next Saturday. He has chosen you, with a dead stare into my eyes. Guess I'm the chosen one and the world ended 2 years ago. On a side note, though, that man could take some meds like a champion. My medic had versed maxed out and he was still standing up condemning people to hell. RN, or. So, when you're doing a total knee, obviously you get some decent pieces of bone sawed off. My patient knew this. As I'm wheeling her back to the OR, she tells me she has a dollhouse built out of the bones of her ancestors. She asked if she could have her bone remnants so she could add her own to the dollhouse. I said anyway, here's some warm blankets. Oof, also another gem. My point, got a hold of the skin marker after I did my interview, get her back to the OR, remove gown, and see she wrote a note to me with my very name telling me she loves me and to do an excellent job. I hate being a nurse, to be honest. As a patient, I said something offensive apparently. I was in for kidney stones and had intense pain in my scrotum. I tried to track down the nurse, but to no avail. I spotted a doctor standing at the elevator bank. I explained my problem in Japanese, and she walked away silently and took the stairway. Somehow it just came out wrong, I guess. Had a psych patient on our acute med floor. I have no psych nursing experience, and he started making a lot of comments about my neck and asked why I wasn't wearing a neck brace. My friend literally said, "You should be wearing a brace around your neck, it's so small and easy for me to snap." I noped right out of that room and only went back into that room without a second nurse with me. My patient didn't actually say anything. 14-year-old extensive psych comes in with mom reporting she's been catatonic for the past 8 hours. I'm doing all the initial ER stuff and talking to the patient assuming she can hear and understand. When I go to leave the room, she tilts her head, hair all looking like the Ring, giggles, has this creepy smile and goes in for a hug. I hugged her and totally expected to be murdered at that moment. When I worked inpatient hospice, we had a patient who was there for a respite stay while they redid the flooring at her apartment. I don't recall what kind of cancer she had that qualified her for hospice, but she was fairly stable medically. She was A and OX4, ambulated independently, and was continent. I had her a few other times that week, and other than refusing baths, she was very pleasant and didn't ask for anything. This particular day my coworker and I had both come in early to cover for the day CNAs. She was supposed to go home that day, so we were surprised to see her still there and were told by the nurse that she had switched to inpatient so they could treat her for the nausea and vomiting she had developed that afternoon. So, we started our rounds and went to check on her. We found her soaked from head to toe and told her that we would like to get her up to the commode and give her a chair bath and change her bed. She agreed, so we got everything set up. My coworker was transferring her to the commode, and she went limp and turned gray. We yelled for the nurse, but she wasn't out there, and the lady perked right back up and was like, "Why are you guys acting like that?" So, we told her that we thought something had happened. She just chuckled and said something did happen, then proceeded to tell us we were her housekeepers and she hired us a long time ago and some other stuff that a confused person would say. When we got her back into bed, she went limp and gray again, and the nurse told us to check her BP just to see what it was. I went and got the vitals tower, and the first 2 times I checked it wouldn't even register. The third time I checked it was like 70/dead or something crazy. I told my coworkers, "Yes, she's going to die tonight." Both of them said, "I don't think she will. She's okay now, we just probably shouldn't get her up." But I had a feeling she was going to. So, then we went a few hours later to do rounds, and she was in her room just chilling, having a nice visit with her family like nothing even happened 2 hours before that. My coworkers both told me, "See, she's fine, she's acting completely normal." But I still had a feeling that she wasn't going to make it through the night. Her family left around 11 p.m. Around midnight we were about to start our rounds again when the call light to that room went off. I looked at my coworker and said, "Told you." She told me it was probably just her calling for water or something. We went in there and sure enough the nurse had pushed the call light because the lady had passed. Old RN, DNR, BMI, RX, stat, etc. Oh. Had elderly, probably 68-70-ish. Lived alone since her husband passed away. Was on Coumadin. So, we would see her monthly at the clinic for her pro-times. She confided to me that there were 3 people living in her attic. 2 men and a woman, but she never saw them. Know how she knew? They would sing up there. And not only regular songs. They were hymns. And the kind that had meaning. "I shall not be moved," said the took her .410 shotgun and tried to shoot them, till someone called the sheriff and took her gun away. Every time she came back, I'd ask about the voices she heard. She said they've gotten worse. They now travel with her in her car. But their voices only come through the speakers. She can't see them hiding in there. God love her, we had called her kids and discussed it before, but called them again, urging them to take her to behavioral health or she probably wasn't safe living alone. Especially on Coumadin. Graduate nurse. Nurse's aide in an old folks home had an otherwise sensible and well put together resident lean in really close to me and say, "Come on, let's roll Gloria for her jewels on the way to lunch, she's got hundreds and hundreds, and I know we could take her." I used to be a jewel thief, you know. Had a resident at the nursing home I had taken care of before passing away in the COVID hall. She didn't like to be changed every 2 hours and would often voice her frustrations. One night, I had come in and told her that I needed to change her because she was wet, but she threatened to call the landlord on me, so there was that. RN, Pediatrics. A patient said, "Yeah, I bet you like that N-word music," after I told him I wasn't a fan of country music. He had a CBI that was wide open, and the bags were running dry every 15 to 20 minutes. So, for the rest of the night whenever my coworkers went in there to help he would tell them, "My nurse doesn't like it when I say bad words." MSN, RN. Oh, I actually have one for this. Was working PEDS-ED when this kid came in for a mild head injury. Concussion, nothing too serious. But the parents were annoyed with the grandma and wouldn't take her calls. So instead, she calls us. And proceeds to explain how, if y'all kill my grandbaby, I'm going to come up in there and shoot all y'all. I know you're doing a great job, but if something happens, I'm going to have to come down and shoot all y'all. Immediately put her on speaker with security in charge, and tried desperately not to let this 80-years-old granny hear me laughing off at her. Police report got filed and everything. MD. I had a patient, oriented, who claimed to have had an affair with Ava Gardner. He was the right age and was probably particularly good looking back in the day, so it wasn't completely crazy. Then he followed it up with one day she dumped me for a black man. As they say in the world, she was a size queen. The best part of the story was that the young, attending doctor asked me to explain what a size queen was, with a straight face. Old RN, DNR, BMI, RX, stat, etc. I was a new young nurse, heck, almost 30 years ago, and taking care of an old, retired doctor who was alcoholic and had esophageal varices. I had long natural deep brown/black hair. He complimented my hair. I said thank you. He asked if it was natural. I said yes sir. Without missing a beat, he said, well, does the carpet match the curtains? There happened to be an older LPN that had just come in with me, and we are a small rural town. She gasped and clutched her imaginary pearls. He was ugly to most staff, but I would act like I was bringing him a drink, but only a small one for his condition. It was half Sprite/half water, just to help him rest. But it was our secret. And he would take his meds from me. One of his personal sitters told me that trick. TKDR, an old patient likes my dark hair and wondered if the carpet matched the curtains. Man was straight up bragging about how he snuck into the women's bathroom and drank the pass out of an unflushed toilet. My other favorite is a PT saying neither I nor the other angels, I have a biblical name, were there for her, and I calmly had to explain that I'm just named after an angel. Disclaimer, I'm essentially a tech at a psych hospital. I proposed to my what seemed like 70-something-year-old anesthesiologist after surgery high on ketamine by offering him a pig or flowers, his choice, as if it were the 1800s and I was trying to sell my daughter to the next best suitor. My nurses all lost it and didn't let me live it down, but I couldn't get over their waffle purses that were dripping maple syrup all over post-op. I was 25 tiny female students, and my fellow student was 19 years old, 6 foot 3 inch male. We had to give a bed bath to a 90 years old, non-orientated, restrained man. He was a petite man. I was washing his feet when he started gyrating his hips. Moaning blossom. Blossom. I about died of embarrassment. As a med-surg nurse for 5 years, mostly at night, I have some crazy ones. My favorite was a septic patient telling me on the same night, I'm not sure I trust you, you have a foxy face. Then at the end of the night, you're so sweet I wish I could cut off your legs and carry you around in my backpack. Straight face, and have never gotten such a compliment since then. RN, ICU. I work on the neuro-PCU floor as a nurse extern aka PCT in nursing school, and a nurse asked me if I wanted to see a bladder scan and straight calf. I replied enthusiastically and went to the patient's 60s M room with her. She proceeded to expose him, clean his skin, and start the bladder scan. I replied, wow, cool. He then said, was it the size or shape of the peen? To that I replied, I haven't seen a bladder scan before, it's cool technology. When she starts the straight calf, he looks at both of us and asks, does any of this ever come often in nature to you ladies? We immediately shut it down with of course not, and later cringed together at that moment. I'm not even a nurse yet, but I'm headed to the ICU and ready to hear better than this. RN, ICU. Guy in his mid-20s, in ICU after a pretty bad car accident, messed himself up fairly good. Has a pretty long rap sheet, mostly drugs. I looked it up after this conversation we had. Little confused, but improving my mental status throughout my shift. Ends up telling me the police officers are looking for him and want to put him away for 25 to life. Naturally, I ask why. He's quiet for a second and tells me he doesn't want to talk about it. Okay then. Change the subject and move on. Then 5 minutes later, he randomly turns to me and says, "You ever see somebody get shot in the head?" Caught me off guard. I paused for a beat and said, no. Have you? Seemed like he was silent forever, but was really only like 15 seconds probably, and then replies nope. Then turns away from me and acts like it never happened. Not super weird, but funny. Had a 60-something frequent flyer on our med-surg floor who was normally pleasantly confused, up ad lib, waiting on placement closer to her home. The patient in the room next to her had a rapid call on them and she stood in her doorway asking how she could help. Since the ICU doc was already in the room, the attendant was standing between the two rooms and this lady looks at him and goes, "It was you, wasn't it?" Doc looks confused. What? "You're the one who got me pregnant before." Mr. Tall, dark and handsome, attending doc is about 5 feet 7 inches and of Middle Eastern descent. Doc laughs. "So that wasn't me, you're thinking of Dr. So-and-so," referring to another attending who is about 6 feet 2 inches, from Africa, and has pretty dark skin. She laughs and goes back into her room to continue coloring and asks who all those people were in her family photo album. Doc told us this story and we all had a good laugh out of it. 70 years old F in ICU after male nurse, got her off the bedpan. She lifts gown over her face, spreads legs wide and says in a baby voice, "I'm dirty, change my diaper, daddy." "Wipe me, daddy." I pulled some wipes out of the package, tossed them on her belly and said, "You can do that yourself," and left the room. It was at that moment I got some understanding about how women feel when guys say creepy to them, except that I was in no danger from this woman. I can only imagine how I'd feel if someone that could overpower me said this. Sent chills down my spine. Edit, patient was AOX4, untreated psych issues for sure. Oddly, her parents were still alive, and she was diagnosed with lung cancer during this admission. It was heartbreaking talking to her about how she was going to tell them the news. I remember being in utter disbelief that both her parents were still alive. Working on the psych floor. Charismatic young man whose mind was fried from spice and salts tells me during a social assessment, "My followers are waiting for you outside." I'm a 6 feet 2 inches, 210 pounds male. Was looking over my shoulder all the way to my car after that shift. Not the weirdest, and not a patient, but a patient's home roommate on the phone. I mention it because, but this was 2 days ago, so it's fresh. I'm a male nurse on a travel contract and the patient is a bariatric woman with leg cellulitis. She's been admitted to us as a repatriation and she's been here 8 days, and I've had her for 4 of those days, 12 hours. I walk in to give her 1,700s and she's on speaker with her roommate, whom she's quick to tell me is not my boyfriend. He's schizophrenic, we live together, but I don't like him like that anymore, even though he likes me. I tell her I have meds and her roommate on speaker asks, "Who's that?" When I walk in, she says, "It's Drixizzle." He says, "Oh, Drixizzle. I've heard a lot about you. Thanks for taking care of her. You've touched her in places I haven't touched in years." And there were so many levels of weirdness too that I went home mildly bothered by it.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.